You a short demo of using the Sanborn maps for West Palm Beach, Florida, although it's applicable to any set of Sanborn maps that is held by the Library of Congress. So I have this particular set of maps bookmarked, but you will find the link on the web page where you found this particular video. If not, you can go to the Library of Congress, but here I have it conveniently bookmarked for you. So we'll go ahead and click on that bookmark, and that will bring us to actually all of the Sanborn fire insurance maps that were done for West Palm Beach. Now, the purpose of these maps, not necessarily from a historical, but from a practical perspective, were to help insurance companies set rates about what you should pay for fire insurance, and if you were even eligible to get fire insurance at your particular house. So in these maps, they would give a very detailed layout of the structures that they saw, what those structures were made out of, and how far it was from the nearest fire station, and were there fire hydrants, and so on. So for West Palm Beach, we have several sets of maps ranging from 1903 until the final volume, which was actually 1952. It was the 1924 maps that they did some corrections and additions on. And if you know anything about West Palm Beach, you are going to know that the maps become gradually much larger, covering a bigger area of the town as it grew. So the first set that's out there was done in April 1903. And it has 6 sheets. So we're going to go ahead and click on this link, and it will bring up the first set of maps. So it says here you have 6 images to look at in this set of maps. So it's not a real big set because the city or town of West Palm Beach was not that large. So we'll go ahead and click on the first one, and it will open up, and from here you can actually enlarge this map. What's nice about Sanborn maps is they usually have, almost always, I've never seen one that didn't have this key. And I'm just using my mouse here to zoom in, but you can also use these plus and minus keys, plus to make it larger, minus to make it smaller. And in this very tiny West Palm Beach, as it was at that time, it shows you certain areas. For example, this is Flagler Park, and it didn't have an insurance map because it was a park, so there really wasn't much to burn here. This particular area held some schools, so they were probably concerned about that, and this is also where the waterworks was. And it's interesting, this is actually a bridge over a swamp, because there was a large swamp about where the Kravis Center is and the high schools, all in that area. There was a swamp there, so they had to put a bridge in. There is no longer a swamp there. This is the original town as it was platted out, with the streets in alphabetical order, which you might know all of them except for one, and that is Althea. That is no longer called Althea, but you see the familiar Banyan, Clematis, Datura, Evernia, and Fern. And that was the original city limits of West Palm Beach in its very early years. So as these areas are marked, you can then go to the next map in the series up here and click on it to see the detail on that. So, and in this particular version, they actually have a part of a certain map on here too. Things that they would be concerned with, like here's a notation of a big lumber shed and a lumber pile, and obviously that's going to put a danger in. Sanborn maps also include, and I'll kind of zoom in on this a bit, a key, which is really important to look at. A lot of times these map sets are available from libraries, but they're in black and white, and they lose a lot of their detail if you don't see these maps in color. So here it says building colors. Yellow is frame, meaning wood. So if you see a yellow building, that means that it's going to be made of wood. Red is brick, kind of makes sense. Blue is stone. A gray building is iron. Brown, adobe, and green are specials. We don't really have browns and greens very much, but we certainly have a lot of red and blue. And blue would also mean concrete block construction, which starts to come in about this time. And hollow tile, which was also a unique building material. It's essentially a concrete block not made from concrete, but from clay. And so they were smaller than a standard concrete block is today, but they were used pretty much in the same way. So if you hear the term hollow tile, it refers to a building that is built of blocks made of clay, typically. So let's go ahead and zoom out, and let's go down here. And again, I'm still on sheet 1. And this is kind of a good view. So here we have Narcissus Street, and here we have Olive, and here we have Clematis. So this is the north side of Clematis Street in 1903. And again, you can zoom in on these maps and get some incredible detail. For example, this was the Palms Hotel. It is now the Palm Beach Theater Works, and in a former life, it was the Quillo Theater, and a former life before that, it was, I believe, the Florida Theater. So this particular area has had a lot of different lives, if you will. But at the time in 1903, you can see some of the things. P.O. means post office. So the man, Mr. Stowers, who owned the hotel, was also postmaster of West Palm Beach. And so he then probably made some money, also allowing his building to serve as the post office at that time. Of course, it no longer is. Here is a GRO, which is a grocery store. Here's a commercial hotel, and that really meant a hotel that wasn't necessarily designed for tourists, more for businessmen, or perhaps people that were working in town during the season and weren't really interested in some of the amenities that a typical tourist hotel. And we see some definite things here, a millinery or a hat shop of some sort. I don't think we would find that much today. And here is a pool room. Very popular were billiards at that time. As we move here to the corner of Clematis and Olive, this is today where Duffy's restaurant is, and it was obviously not there at the time. This was the Dade County Bank, and this was the printing shop for the Tropical Sun newspaper at that time. It also hosed a tailor shop and various other things. What is interesting is these two buildings essentially still exist. They have been absorbed into a larger building that was built around this with a different facade. But the guts of these two buildings exist in the year 2022. This one is actually currently, at the time of this video, is under renovation. I'm not sure what they're putting into it, but at one time this was a large department store called Hatches in its various incarnations as it was combined into one building. And that's what's so great about using these maps, because you can see that sort of detail that existed, at least in that moment in time. As we move up here, this alley still exists. It's not something I would necessarily want to walk down today, but it still exists, and it was designed for deliveries, also for horse wagons, so that horse wagons could deliver up and down these alleys. That's a feature you see throughout the site plan and the town plat of the town of Lake Worth. They allowed alleys for your horses. As we move now to Narcissus Street, where it says Seminole Hotel is now the parking garage. So if you've ever parked at that large parking garage and gone over to Green Market, it was at one time a hotel. And these things that are noted are actually the first floor little shops that existed in most kinds of these buildings. Back here, we actually had a beer warehouse. The owner of this hotel and his brothers had places all up and down the east coast of Florida. And they were the Zapp brothers. They were all originally from Germany, and they dealt in Anheuser-Busch beer. And I guess this must have been a pretty well-protected building. Also notice the red exterior. That means that it's at least cladded with brick. But its inner core, of course, contained a lot of wood at that time. And so, interesting. Also, an interesting notation here, Chinese laundry. Also fascinating that they would have used a term like that, but it was a commonly used term. Here we have one of the infamous Banyan Street saloons. So we got a lot going on here, as you can really see. A bicycle store. You've got a shoemaker, jewelry, hand laundry, and so on. So you've got everything going on here that the person of 1903 needed. So we can go on to the next map in this series. And we're going to go down and see what streets we have here. So here we are on Datura Street. And I had actually just found a picture of the building that occupies this. It became a small hotel. At this time, it was simply someone's house. But it became a small hotel or inn called the Detroit. But at this time in 1903, it was still just someone's house. Here looks like some almost identical cottages that were built. These a lot of times were rented out to the entire for the entire season to a family or a couple who really wanted to seem like you were living there. Kind of an early VBRO sort of concept that existed in 1903. And here we have the Ehrman. It actually should be spelled Ehrman, but it's pronounced Ehrman. And the Ehrman family is very important in the early history of West Palm Beach. They were mayors, they were dentists. The family is still here in politics up in Vero Beach. So really, really important early family to West Palm Beach. So just looking at the detail of one of these little houses. So what we see here is when we see this dotted line around things, that means it's an open porch. The 2 would indicate that this was a 2-story house, and the D means simply dwelling. Now, this little house here on the out is probably either a garage or would become a garage, but more likely this was some sort of little horse stable. Remember, we're in 1903, so cars are still pretty darn rare in this time of where we were in West Palm Beach history. Here we have another house. So you can see once you left Clematis Street, you were simply in, if you will, the suburbs, the suburbia of West Palm Beach. All of this is now, I don't believe any of these structures exist at all. Mostly this is a business district nowadays with many different things. And this is just a little sliver here of what became Flagler Drive, which was mostly built on fill, because Narcissus, as you know, is not this close to the water today. It's much further out. So you can go through these images very easily and explore what you want in Old West Palm Beach and look at how things. I use these quite often when I find an old photograph on eBay or I find an old brochure. I'll find a random picture and I'll be able to sometimes exactly match up houses as to how they stood here. It's really kind of fun. It's almost like a little quest to find things. This is quite interesting. This was the original passenger depot that was on Ivernia Street for the Florida East Coast Railway. They built a much bigger depot north soon after this, but this was the original depot. And it was quite small, but it was right there on Ivernia. And it'll identify buildings like this is East Coast Hotel, a little warehouse. I mean, you kind of begin to understand the short, the kind of the abbreviations of things very quickly. You can see this is a tiny little house here, right here on the corner, a very, very small house. It's hard for me to say how big these houses were. I don't think they were very large. A lot of them also, these little things might be outhouses. I have a feeling this was probably an outhouse right here on the back. Or it could be a kitchen. Very often the kitchen was not directly on the house. Like this could be a kitchen or perhaps this over here because of the danger of fire. And that was real. When you had no way to call someone up. There was very few telephones at this time in West Palm Beach, so you had to run and hopefully get somebody at the fire station. This is the Keystone Hotel that eventually they built a new hotel right across the street, a much bigger hotel. This whole area now is a huge condo is being put in here. And so very little of this you're going to actually, if anything, you're going to recognize today. You will kind of see a lot on Clematis. Is probably the most well-preserved old street of West Palm Beach, and in my opinion, the best preserved downtown street of any city in South Florida. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you to learn how to use these maps, and you can follow the bookmark that I will provide for you. I'll also put it in the comments on this video on YouTube, and you can just have fun looking at these. Like I said, this particular set, we do have quite a bit for West Palm Beach, which is really wonderful that we have this many, including the last set that was ever published. So if you're a history buff, this is really a great resource to learn about old West Palm Beach.